The next question is, tell me how you have successfully implemented change in an organization. Now, in this question, how you will answer it is, how I have successfully implemented change in my organization is that when I joined my team, my organization, the mindset was very waterfallish as we were going through a transition phase. We were going through a transition phase from waterfall to agile. And when I joined my team, my goal was to help the team, help the organization transition faster from waterfall to agile model. And how I did that, how I became a catalyst for that change from waterfall to agile is by showing the value to teams by mentoring, coaching, having sessions, knowledge sessions with the team, showing them the value the agile process brings to the table and how it is better than the scrum process, how it is better, how the scrum process of inspection and adaptation is better than the waterfallish model of doing things, how we can iterate every 2 weeks, have a retrospective, improve and move in that way. And that is how I success, and that led to a wide scale implementation of scrum across teams and the scrum ceremonies, and the teams actually enjoyed having those scrum ceremonies, and we were able to move through the transition phase faster because of my help and other people help who knew agile and being a catalyst in that change. That is how we were able to successfully implement change in an organization. Okay, and then eventually we ended up following safe because we are a very big organization, we are a very big enterprise. But for a scrum master role, that is how I was able to successfully implement change in my organization, moving the organization faster from a waterfallish mindset to a agile mindset, a scrum inspection and adaptation mindset. You will know the answer. Now the next question is, could you please tell me your role in a project from start to finish? Now, see, the word project, it might trip you up. Some scrum masters, they are not familiar with the word project and they are like, word project, I'm not project manager. It's okay. A lot of organizations, there are mixed roles. Not a lot of organizations, some organizations nowadays, there are mixed roles, but don't let it trip you up. Okay. So how you will answer this question is that in my current project, my role starts with the requirements coming into the product owner and the product owner breaking those requirements down in form of epics. Once we have the requirements in the form of epics, my role as a scrum master is I have a one-on-one with the product owner, and I kind of understand what the epics are and the business requirements and things like that. And then once we have that, then we have a session with the team, the technical team, on what the requirements are and how we can break the epics down further into user stories in the backlog refinement session. In the backlog refinement session, we break the epic down into further user stories, which have a proper acceptance criteria and a proper definition associated with them. We also add story point to these user story through the planning poker exercise or the fist of five voting, where we sit together and we give them story points and make sure that the stories meet the invest criteria, which is they are independent and they are negotiable and they are variable and they are economical and they are small and they are testable. No, not variable. They are there is value or something, some word like that over there. So basically, what is that the user story is the smallest possible. When we reach to a story that is independent in itself and that can deliver independently, that can deliver a value to the customer, that can be independently a minimum viable product in itself, but cannot be broken down further. That is a perfect user story. Okay, we do the prioritization of the user stories in that, and then once we have the user stories prioritized and broken down and with proper estimation, then we move the user stories into the sprint. Then we have our sprint planning session where we move the user stories into the current sprint, define our sprint goal, and we start up sprint. Now that I am facilitating the sprint planning session, I'm facilitating the backlog refinement session and making sure that the estimation is done properly, everybody is participating, and make sure that the team is present and active in these ceremonies. Once I have done that, then I make sure that in the sprint planning the session, the sprint goal is clear to the team. Once we have the sprint planning session, then we move to the daily scrum, which happens every day in our team, all 5 days of the week. And in the daily scrum, I'm facilitating the ceremony, and I'm basically asking three questions. What did you do yesterday? What are you working on today? Any impediments you're facing? Once we have the daily scrum finished, then we have our sprint demos towards the end of the sprint, where we showcase what we have done to our stakeholders and what we have achieved so far in terms of our MVP and our user story. Once we get their feedback, which we add then to the backlog, we collect the feedback from them and we make sure that everything is on par with them. Then we have our sprint retrospective and the sprint demo. I'm facilitating, I'm collecting the feedback, I'm making sure that we understand what the feedback is and making sure that we get it to the backlog. And then we have the sprint retrospective session, which is the most important session towards the end of the sprint, in which we come together and we discuss what we did well, what we didn't do so well, what we could have improved on, and who is accountable for making those improvements. And this is a session that I facilitate, and this is a session that is the most important session for me, because in this session I get to see how the team has been and who's feeling hurt, and the team gets to share what they felt through the sprint and what they can improve. After the sprint ends, I also create a sprint report which contains sprint burndown chart and velocity chart, which show what we have done in the sprint so far, how many story points were completed as compared to the previous sprint, and our sprint burnout chart as well. That is the sprint report for the stakeholders and for the management. That is also I created by me, and I share that with the management. During the sprint, I also make sure there are no impediments, there are no blockers faced by the team. And if there are any, it is my responsibility to make sure those impediments and blockers are resolved. Also, my responsibility is to bring up the risk log, raid log, and make sure that the team understands the risk. And if there can be any risk that is accepted, mitigated, or can be resolved, it is done properly. That is also my responsibility. I also meet with my product owner almost every day to kind of go over our backlog, make sure our backlog is healthy, and make sure that our technical debt is managed safely, and make sure if there are any other things that need to be considered in the sprint. Those are some of the things I'm doing in my project from start to finish. Not only that, I'm also meeting with my stakeholders to kind of manage their expectations and keep a bridge of communication between them and the progress of the technical team on every MVP that we are doing. I also help with the release planning when the releases come through. That is what I'm doing in my current project from start to finish as a Scrum Master. That is how you will answer this question. And you can kind of change this question according to your role if you're doing something else and things like that. You can do that. But that is how this question needs to be answered. Now, moving on to the next question, which is, how have you dealt with a deadline, assuming they reduced the delivery date? How have you dealt with a deadline, assuming they reduced the delivery date? What does that mean? They reduce the delivery date. So maybe the delivery date was supposed to be 12th and they reduce it to 10th. Okay, no problem. So this is the thing, right? First of all, as I mentioned, having a communication bridge between you and the stakeholders is super important. Okay. If the stakeholder is happy, you can delay the deadline, you cannot even cross the deadline, you can whatever, right? Things will be a little bit easier. I won't say you should do that, but things will be a little bit easier because the stakeholder, they are happy, they don't care. They understand what's going on. They understand the reasoning why it's happening, right? The reasoning why it's happening, that's super critical. So communicating with the stakeholder, having that relation where you can go back and forth with the stakeholders and explaining to them, what is going on in the sprint at all times. And it also depends on the contract, what kind of contract you have. But in general, having that relationship with the stakeholder where you can communicate the progress of the sprint and communicate the progress of the project goes a long way, because then they already know if you are going to miss a deadline or if the deadline has been reduced or whatever. They already know what the progress is. They already know what has been done so far and if it can be achieved or it cannot be achieved, right? Nothing will be a surprise, basically. If it's a surprise, then it's not good. People are not happy. right? So that is number one way. Now, how if the delivery date has been reduced, right? How you will deal with it is basically, if it's possible for your team to skip on something that's less important, that can be postponed to the next part, whether it's some spike or some technical debt or something like that, that can be postponed to the next part, it can be done that way as well. Now the other way is that while you are in starting a project, you have to make sure that you leave some buffer space. You leave some buffer space. For example, in safe they have, IP, which is some things that they leave in toward the fifth sprint in the process, that they leave for, for innovation and for bug fixes, or for any other things that might pop up during the project, any surprises, right? There's a buffer of one sprint just for innovation, but it can be used as a buffer for anything else, right? Same way, in a project, have some buffer towards the end where, if something happens or something pops up, you are safe. You have that buffer that you can use to fix those things. And if that buffer has been removed, then that's fine, because that was just there as a safeguard, right? So that is also one way you can handle this. Now the other way you can handle this is that, you have to understand the team capacity, if it can be done or cannot be done, and your budget. If you have more money, you have more budget to hire more resources, or more team members, you can do that, as you can go about it that way as well, or third party vendors, or what may, right, to finish the project on time. So that is how I will deal with this situation, right? That is how I will deal with the situation, and make sure your team knows what's going on at all times with the deadline. Uh, you have to communicate with your team, because they are the ones who are actually doing the work. So if they know they are in the clear, then it shouldn't be that big of a problem. So that is how I will handle this problem. Now, the other question is that, what other frameworks have you introduced to your team to help them deliver work? Now, see, me personally, I have experience with Scrum and Kanban. Kanban is more so used. I have used Kanban in a security team where the we were doing kind of help desk stuff and things like that, and our workflow was stable. Tickets would come in, we would have those tickets in kind of a workflow model, work in progress model, what is in progress, what we are going to resolve, what is done. That is how the workflow worked. We didn't have no inspection adaptation. We didn't need no inspection adaptation. We didn't need no sprint planning. We didn't need no backlog refinement. None of that stuff. There was a workflow. We did that workflow, and we kept on moving, kept on moving, kept on. That's where Kanban is successful. So if you are asked this question, you can honestly say I work with Scrum and Kanban. Scrum is used for teams where the backflow is changing. We need to refine the backlog. We need to do more inspection and adaptation. That is where Scrum is used, especially for new teams. But in teams where work is, or teams are mature, or the work is already predefined, work, we don't need to do any refinement. It's just regular flow of work coming in that needs to be done on a regular cadence every week, every day. Then we don't need any inspection or adaptation. And those places, Kanban has been super successful. And that's where I have used Kanban. So that is how you will answer this question, that I have used Scrum and Kanban. And Kanban I have used in more mature teams, where there is no need for daily Scrum, or there is no need for things like a weekly backlog refinement, because the team is mature enough to handle their issues themselves, or resolve their conflicts themselves, or handle their backlog efficiently themselves, where they don't need new ceremonies to resolve that. And there is not too much of a need of inspection and adaptation. And in Kanban, I have worked, because in Kanban there is it's used for more of teams which deal with free flowing work, which comes in at a regular cadence every day or every week. We use Kanban over there. So that is how you would answer this question. Okay. Now moving on to the next question. In this question, the interviewer is trying to understand, what is your experience with managing upwards, managing people, where you might have to say no once in a while, but the saying no is the tough part, where you might not want to say no because you might be scared, or you might be nervous. So that's what the interviewer is trying to understand. How have you managed a difficult stakeholder? First of all, you have to understand that, right? If the stakeholder is being difficult, there must be a need behind it. What's that need? What's the reason? Why is it being difficult? What's the requirement? And why are we not able to solve that requirement? What's the root cause, right? What's the root cause of it? That's what you need to identify. Why is the stakeholder being difficult? Okay, if they give you a scenario, if the interviewer says, oh no, just the stakeholder, they come into the sprint demo and they say, oh, this is not perfect, this is not perfect. Try to then in that situation, when you know that something is not perfect, why is it not perfect? When stakeholder is giving a requirement to the product owner or to you, if you're working in that kind of role in a startup or whatever, the stakeholder is giving you a requirement. They sign some form of like approval, that they approve the requirement that they've given and everything is verified and they approve of it. So either that process is weak, and if that process is weak or there is no approval signature, then that's a problem. Then you need to get into that. Okay, when we collected, and that is there, we collected the requirements, the stakeholder approved, they signed. Okay, then you can go back to the document. Look, this is what we discussed. This is what's here. This is what's here. What's going on? What's changed now? Why did it change all of a sudden? Having the document to go back to, that the document will serve as a base. Having the document to go back to will go a long way. So how you have managed a difficult stakeholder in your past is by going to that document where the stakeholder gives the approval. The second way you have managed a difficult stakeholder in the past is by having that working relationship before the project starts with the stakeholder, whether a personal relationship or whether a working relationship where you have a back and forth bridge of communication where you can tell him or her some things easily when the time comes right. That is how you manage a difficult stakeholder. If they are saying something, if they are not happy with something, they're coming from some place, and you have to understand what place they are coming from. That is how I would manage a difficult stakeholder. Moving on to the next question. Give an example of a time you changed the mind of a senior sponsor. Senior sponsor? What did you do? What's a senior sponsor? Maybe a senior stakeholder or a senior manager. Yeah, so I think the student is in UK, so maybe in UK they ask management and things, they call them sponsors or whatever. Yeah, give me an example of a time you changed the mind of a senior sponsor. What did you do? So how you will answer this question is like this. In my particular case, how I changed the mind of a senior sponsor is that, um, first of all, I try to explain the value that whatever I'm trying. It doesn't ask me in this question, how did you change the mind? What did you change the mind about? Did you change your mind about eating breakfast, or did you change your mind about the new process? But we are going to think that it's about a new process. We're going to answer in those terms. So how I changed the mind of my senior sponsor in terms of agile practices, in terms of adopting agile in the organization, is by showing the value. Business people, they like to see value. They like to see a return on their investment. And if I can show that my process makes the process more efficient, brings a lot of value in terms of money saved, in terms of resource capacity saved, then and also customer satisfaction, then my process is better. The process that I'm trying to introduce is better. That's how I was supposed to show that that's how I was able to show the value that the process brings to the table and change the mind of a senior sponsor. That is what I did. Now, or a senior stakeholder or a senior manager or a senior person. As a Scrum Master, what data do you have that facilitate decision making? So in this, you can answer that, there are multiple data sets that I look at to facilitate decision making, which is a sprint burnout chart, bug defects, how much bugs are being leaked from our development, what are the amount of story points we are developing per sprint, and what the amount of bugs that are being leaked in those in that particular story point. That is what I will say to facilitate decision making. So bug leakage, velocity chart, sprint burndown chart. Those are the some tools that I use to facilitate decision making as a Scrum Master. Okay, that's some of the data that I use to facilitate decision making as a Scrum.